Hey there, welcome to today's episode. Looking at something a little bit different today. It is the Shinobi Fader from NKYC Lab. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this is, it's basically an iOS application that you can use on your iPhone or your iPad, and it acts like a turntable, so you can do some scratching with it. Now, inside of this box is a crossfader that attaches to your iPhone or your iPad, and it allows you to have a pretty realistic turntable experience on your iOS device. Now, for full disclosure, I reached out to NKYC and asked if they wouldn't mind sending me one of these in return for a review. And what they did was they offered me a pretty decent discount. So it wasn't completely free. I had to put some money towards this, but I'm under no obligation to give you anything other than an honest review of this particular product. Now, we're going to open up the box and take a look at the crossfader in a second, but it also comes with this clear plastic disc if you order the iPad version. This is the Shinobi Fader M model. There was a T model, but I believe that was like an older version. This newer version apparently works with iPads and iPhones if you have a screen protector installed. And I have to say, as an old school turntablist, I'm kind of interested to see what this feels like. Now, of course, the first thing we want to do is open up the box and see what's included. Now, there's a little plastic card. This looks like a business card, but what I think it's for is actually removing the suction cups when you stick the crossfader or your disc to your device. You get this cable included with it, which is for connecting the crossfader to your device. And hopefully you can see it's a USB-C to USB-C cable with a lightning adapter as well if you want to plug it into an iPhone. There's a little soft pouch to put the crossfader into. It also comes with the disc for the iPhone version, so you get this small disc as well. There's a nice little Shinobi Fader sticker. Now, I'm not sure if this is just part of the packaging or whether it's some kind of anti-slip mat if you're using this on the desk. And then we get to the main part, which is the Shinobi Fader. It's got a pretty nice action on it, nice and smooth. It looks like a 3D printed part, but it feels solid enough. It feels pretty well made. You'll notice underneath it's got suction cups. That's how it's going to stick to your iPhone or iPad screen. And on the back of it, you can see the USB-C port, which is how it's going to be connected. Now, the cool thing about the Shinobi Fader is that the application is completely free. You can actually download that, install it, and play around with it without the need to purchase the crossfader. I think that's pretty cool because it allows you to play around the application, see what it's all about. And then if you want to, of course, you can purchase the crossfader and the little disc that goes along with it. Now, we didn't get any instructions in the box, but there are instructions online on the NKYC website. And because my iPad is used all the time, it's something that you're touching constantly. To give this a first shake, what I'm going to do is just use an alcohol wipe and wipe down the screen before we begin. We can then open up the Shinobi app and take a look at it. Now, the layout changes ever so slightly depending on the device, of course. The screen size will play some part in that. I use a 12.9 iPad Pro. This is a 6th generation M2 version. And when you're ordering online, you can specify the size of the disc that you'd like for your iPad. Now, because of the size of my iPad, I went for the biggest disc that was available. This is 17 centimeters, and you can see it's a pretty good size. Now, before we even install the crossfader or the little disc, I just want to run you through the application so you can see what it's all about. In order to do that, I'm going to have to just plug in some audio cables so you guys can hear what's going on. And with that hooked up, let's take a look at some of the features. Now, it's a pretty nice user interface, nice, simple, and clean. You can tweak that with custom skins, but we'll talk about that later on. Now, we have one turntable platter in the middle, but you have access to two decks essentially. So you've got deck A and deck B, and you'll notice at the top you've got a waveform view, a little bit like when you're using Serato, so that as you're playing around with your samples, you can see the waveform in real time. Now, these top two buttons here allow you to access what you're going to load onto each turntable and a couple of other settings. We'll look at that in a second. And obviously, when you press play on either deck, that's going to begin playback of the sample, and of course you press it again to stop it. So on deck A by default, you get a typical scratch sample file. So there's a bunch of kind of spoken word stuff, some noises, things that you're going to cut up. And on your deck B, that's going to be for loading up loops, audio that you want to play to. On this right-hand side, we've got a cut button. So if you don't want to get the crossfader straight away, but you still want to play around with this thing, you can do, and you can still chop your samples by just tapping the cut button. There's a cut button for deck B as well. We've got a settings button. We'll dive into that in a moment. We've got a record button. So the record button allows you to record your own voice or anything through the iPad or your iPhone's microphone. Again, we'll come back and test that a little bit later in the video. You've then got pitch, volume, and effects. So for your deck A, you can change the pitch of that sample in terms of the speed of the playback. You can change the volume, and you can add some effects. So you've got some delay and some reverb. And again, we'll be showing that as a demonstration later on. At the top on the left-hand side, you've got your cue points. So you can set cue points throughout your sample. Now, that's going to be great for your vocal samples or drum loops, anything that you like. You'll be able to set cue points just like you can in Serato. If we open up the settings menu, now starting at the top, we have our reverse mode. That's for switching the crossfader. So if you prefer to scratch hamster style, you can. Flip mode underneath changes the layout. and that's going to be useful depending on whether you're left or right-handed. If we open up the fader start section, according to the manual, if you turn fader start on, if you have your red cue point, and we'll take a look at the cue points in a second, if you have that red cue point set, you can actually use the pitch slider in order to jump back to that cue point. The B button underneath means that you can no longer mute the deck B. Cut lag, it's the cut in time for the crossfader, and if you press this little icon here, it's going to change the fader area to transform mode. That will make more sense when we look at it later on. Now moving back, we've got our skin button. This allows you to install custom skins. This is a paid add-on. It's not very expensive. I bought it because I'm an artist, so of course I want to fiddle around and see what I can do with this thing, create some custom skins for it. I think it'd be kind of fun. And what we'll do a little bit later, I'll show you the ones that I've made and how I installed it. Underneath we have fader calibration, so when the crossfader is installed, it'll allow you to calibrate that crossfader, and again we're going to cover that when we actually install the crossfader. And now I just want to show you inside of these two menu options at the top. So if we click this one on the top left, this is for deck A. It opens up a menu where we can select a few things. BBC will allow you to look at any imported media in alphabetical order. Now I've only loaded one track in this way, and that was using Apple Music, I believe. Using the same function, you can also select playlists, so you can create your own playlists and import those. Now I don't tend to use Apple Music and iTunes that much anymore, but if I want to just load up a file, I can do that from the Files browser, and that will allow me to select any audio file and load that thing up. So far, I've only tested WAV files with it, so I'm not 100% sure in terms of the format, but it certainly loads WAV files. If we press where it says scratch, this gives us the basic installed content. So we have our Shinobi DJ sample starter pack. If we open that up, it gives us our scratch sample, the vocals, those kind of things. And underneath, it gives us 6 beats to get started. You also get this Shinobi DJ sound pack, and that's got some typical tone samples like a sine wave, things like that. Things that you might just want to play around with, like longer tones, and cut those up. The recorded tab is anything you've recorded via your device's microphone. So if you've recorded your voice to scratch or played around with some other recording, it's going to be listed here. And finally, you get to the store. In the store, you're able to purchase more sound packs and things like that and then install them. Now for deck A and deck B, it's exactly the same thing. This is to load to deck A, and of course the orange side is to load up to deck B, but you'll see exactly the same set of options. Now let's just take a look at how this reacts without any of the crossfader or the disc installed. You can press play on deck A, it's going to begin to play those samples, and using your finger, of course, you can manipulate this platter and just play around with it.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Shinobi DJ. It's time.
You get the idea. Deck B, as I've already mentioned, is for the playback of your loops, your tracks. And I like how it's just got that little fake turntable stopping noise. I think that's kind of fun. If you want to chop up your sample and you don't have the crossfader, you just have the application, you can use this little button here to add chops in. And just playing around with this thing, it's pretty responsive and it feels really nice, but I do think you need to install the crossfader and the disc in order to get the best out of this, if you're into turntablism and scratching. Okay, let's get the disc and the crossfader installed. Again, to give it the best chance, I clean this lightly with an alcohol wipe, and we're just going to stick that in the middle. It has a little suction cup, and we're just going to put it right in the middle here. Now for both the disc and the crossfader, if you do want to remove those, it suggests you use this little plastic card to avoid damaging your device. Once the suction cup is in place, you can see it spins freely across the top. And I think what it's going to do is take away just some of that friction that you will get from your finger on a typical display like this. Now when it comes to fitting your crossfader, one thing I have found with my version of the application for the 12.9-inch iPad, it doesn't really leave you a lot of room for the fader. If you look at this, the iPhone version, or even some of the smaller iPads, there's kind of a decent bit of screen space where you would stick this crossfader. Now the crossfader doesn't have to be on the screen, it could just be stuck to a tabletop or something, but ideally I want this to be attached to the screen so it feels really portable. And for now, because I prefer scratching with my right hand, I'm just going to place it down here. It's going to cover the play button ever so slightly for deck B, but I think we can get away with it and still be able to access the deck B button. But it is a little bit strange that on the 12.9 iPad version, they don't give you a little bit more kind of real estate to mount the fader. Now you can see I can still access the play button. And the next thing we need is our little USB-C cable to plug it in. Now, because I'm using the iPad, I'm going to remove the lightning connector. I don't need that. I'm going to start by plugging it into the fader. And And because I need audio out so that you guys can hear what's happening directly from the iPad, and just so that I can charge the device, you'll notice I've got my USB-C hub plugged in. So this is going to go to the USB-C port on the hub, not directly into the device, which of course you could do if you're just on the go. Now, in order to get the fader calibrated, it seems pretty straightforward according to the instructions. We have to press the settings button, and then what we do is we move the fader over to the left-hand side fully, and then we hit fader calibration. And what you'll notice is there's a little flash on the screen to say that it's been calibrated. Hopefully you saw that. We then do the same. We're going to slide it all the way over to the right, and we're going to do fader calibration. And watch out for that flash. So this should now be good to go. Now, if you need a little bit more cut-in time, you want to adjust the lag. We discussed that before where we have our fader start. We could adjust our cut lag here inside of this settings menu. I want it as sharp as possible, so I'm going to leave it set to 0. And I know the turntablists, the people that are serious about scratching, you're going to want to know what that cut-in time is like. So for that, I'm going to load up the classic R sound, and we'll just open and close the fader a little bit. Hopefully, you'll be able to see how much I'm moving it. I'm hoping it's a pretty tight cut. I'm pleased to say that is a pretty tight cut-in. Feels almost instantaneous. One thing I'm also curious about is the longevity of a crossfader like this. Again, the turntablists and the serious DJs, you know that you can wear out a crossfader, particularly crossfaders that are designed for scratching over a long period of time. They can break down. I'm not sure about the technology inside of this one. I don't know how it's configured, but only time will tell on that. But I'm pretty impressed by the cut-in time. Okay, let's give this its first basic run through. Now, a couple of things. I'm sitting down, which is not my natural position when I'm DJing. I prefer to be standing. So I feel a little bit cramped up, but obviously I'm trying to record this for you guys, so I need to be at the desk with the overhead camera. I don't have any expectations that this is going to feel exactly like a real bit of vinyl. So I think there'll be certainly a learning curve, and it's something that you're going to have to get used to. And in terms of the other features, we're going to get to those. So the cue points, the delay effects, those kind of things. I'll come back and look at that in a second. Let's just do a very quick run through and see what this feels like. Let's play the beat. Alright, we'll stop it there for a second. It certainly feels strange. Obviously, it's not going to feel like a real turntable. And a couple of things that I'm concerned about is how much force that I put through things, because I don't want the little suction cup to pop off, or I don't want to pull the crossfader off the top here. So I'm being kind of cautious with it at first. I have to say though, it's not unpleasant. It's kind of cool to play around on. Now, another thing that I've noticed, it's a pretty short throw fader, and what I mean by that is it doesn't take long to get from one side to the other. Now, if you're like me and you're quite heavy-handed when you're scratching, you may find that you're jumping right over to deck B quite a lot and cutting that off. But what I'm wondering is inside of the settings, can we actually disable that? I've got a feeling if we go to settings and we go to our fader start and we press B, I'm hoping that means you can't mute deck B whilst we're scratching, but we'll test it out now. That's pretty cool. That's exactly what it does. So if you are a little bit heavy-handed, you find that you're cutting off deck B too much, sometimes you might want to do that creatively, but at least you've got the option that you can disable that if you like. Now, of course, I'm going to come back and do a few more little scratch demos on this thing towards the end of the video, but I do want to run through some of the other features that you can play around with. The first one is looking at the custom skins, because I think that is a fun way of jazzing this up. If we go to skin, I will show you how I set up my custom skins. Now, you don't get any by default. It's not like there's a pack of skins that come with it. I think that would be quite a nice thing to see, maybe from the manufacturers. That would be cool if they just give you a few skins to get started with. But you'll notice at the top, I can change the Platter skin. And if I open this up, gives me access to my photos. Now, I actually took a photo of my real turntable and then played around with it inside of Photoshop, and I came up with this one as the Platter. And I think it looks pretty cool, looks realistic, feels more like a turntable when you're playing with it. And you can also change the body skin by clicking on change body skin and doing the same thing. Now for this, I just went with a photo of aluminium, just something plain grey, so it looks a little bit like an old school turntable, but of course you could put anything you like in here. Now, it's a silly little thing, I know, but it does make it feel a little bit more turntable-like. I think it's more fun to play around with if you set a custom skin, but of course it's up to you if you want to pay for that extra. Next, I want to take a quick look at the cue points. So if we open up the cue point menu, pretty self-explanatory if you've ever used something like Serato. You can scroll through your sample looking at the waveform, and basically you can just add cue points wherever you like. That means that when you're playing around, if you want to jump between certain phrases or certain parts of your sample, you can do that, and you can set 5 of these, as you can see on the left hand side. If you want to reset those, you just press the clear button and then delete whatever cue point you don't want, so you can start again, add all new fresh cue points in. Now let's say I found a phrase inside of the sample that I want to be able to jump to easily. I just locate that, find the beginning of it in the waveform, and add my cue points.
Oh yeah.
Life is scratch.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You get the idea. Now, all of the features that I'm going to show you at this point, including the cue points, are only available for Deck A. Deck B is primarily for playing your audio loops, anything that you import. But maybe as a future update, it would be kind of cool to maybe see some of those features so that you could maybe have cue points for the other deck, be able to switch between the two, something like that. Moving back to our main page, I want to show you pitch, volume, and effects. So as you would imagine inside of this menu, we can play around with our pitch, volume, some reverb, and some delay. Now you select what you want to edit. In this case, by default, it's set to volume. So as we play with this slider, it's changing the volume of the sample.
Life is.
If you need to reset it, you can just hit the reset button. It's going to put it back to default. You can also play with the pitch. You can pitch down and you can pitch up a little bit. There's also some reverb you can add to your samples. And you'll notice you can choose a reverb type at the top. So you've got small room, medium room, large room, medium hall, large hall, and then back to small room. And with the slider, you can then just add a percentage or an amount of that effect to be applied to the sample. Next is the delay effect, and I really like having delay on scratches. It just sounds really nice. If we open up the delay menu, at the top there is a tap tempo button, and that's really handy because, of course, depending on the loop, something that you're playing, that you're scratching to, you want to be able to match the tempo so that your delay sounds correct. Underneath, you have typical delay effect parameters, so you can set the amount of feedback, like how long you want the tail of that delay to last. And underneath, we've got our dry and wet mix, so how much of that effect do you want to apply to your samples. Now, another great feature is the recording option. Unfortunately, because the way I've got my USB hub plugged in, I can't access my microphone directly. I would need to have that unplugged. But I will show you the options. You go to the recording button. At the top, you have your main record button. When you press this, it is going to begin to record. Now, I didn't record any input signal, but you could say something into your microphone, whatever you like. Record a sound or something that you want. And then you'll notice it's flashing set. If you press set, it's going to set that as your new sample. Obviously, I didn't record anything, so this is completely silent, but you get the idea. That can then be manipulated and scratched upon the turntable, which is pretty cool. And there we go. That just about covers all of the features on this application. Now, at the end of the video, I'm going to sign off with a little bit more freestyle scratching. But before I do that, I just want to give you my final thoughts on this as a product. Now, I have to say, it is surprisingly good. I say that because as a turntable, as somebody that's used to using real vinyl, I don't think I'd set the bar too high in terms of my expectations. But actually, I think this has exceeded them. Now, don't get me wrong, it's never going to replace my full turntable setup. There are simply just certain things you can't do with an iOS screen, even with the little plastic disc, that you could do with a real piece of vinyl. There's just certain movements, things that you won't be able to replicate. However, for your basic and even more complex scratches, it is pretty good, and it would certainly be a great practice device if you want to just sit down on the couch, noodling around. Maybe you're working on double click flares or something. This would be a great application for doing that. The one thing that I'd really like to see from the developers is the ability to take the audio from this into other applications. I think that's where it could become really, really fun. Now, at the time of making this video, I've not found any way to do it, even using something like Orm. Because this isn't AUV3, there's no way for me to take the audio output from this into, say, another application like Koala Sampler or even Logic, something like that. Now, you can use Koala beats because, of course, you can load in your own beats, so you could export a beat from Koala and then scratch over it. You can also use the background audio function inside of Koala so that you could set something up with Koala, keep that running in the background, open this application, and then you could scratch over the top as well. But in terms of recording that performance into Logic, Koala Sampler, currently there doesn't seem to be any way to do that. Now, don't get me wrong, I could take the iPad, and if I was using one of my other samplers, the SP404 Mark II or my MPC, of course I can then record the output from the iPad, so if I want to add scratches to my MPC tracks, SP404 Mark II, I could do that. But overall, I do have to say, I'm pretty impressed with it. It feels really good. It's a lot of fun. The fader is nice and sharp. And I think if you're a turntablist, you're into scratching, you're certainly going to have plenty of hours worth of fun out of this thing. I will put a link to the product in the description. Obviously, you can head over to the NKYC website and check it out for yourself. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. We'll end on a couple of little scratch performances, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.
Drop the beat. Drop the beat.
Oh yeah.
Drop the beat.
Oh yeah.